The sequel to the critically acclaimed movie Inception came out last week, this time around featuring Leonardo DiCaprio's intrepid band of dream intruders implanting an idea in Ellen Page's character's brain, namely the idea that she is actually a man. In a classic case of life imitating art, the actress formerly known as Ellen Page has announced that she in fact identifies as a man and asks to be henceforth referred to as Elliot. This means Elliot went from being a gay female married to a woman to your run-of-the-mill straight white male, which means she's no longer allowed to have opinions about anything without someone bringing up the fact that she's a straight white male. Wait, sorry, she's trans, so it doesn't work like that? Huh. Health experts across the continent are attempting to cancel Christmas. America voted in a reality TV star to be their president, and after 4 years of surprisingly good policy, record unemployment and support amongst minorities, a rip-roaring economy, and a subsidy program unleashing a vaccine for the novel coronavirus in record time, America seems to have voted him out because character matters, and he's kind of a twat. Provided the current litigation regarding election fraud doesn't pan out, they will have voted to replace him with Joe Biden, a geriatric pedophilic dementia patient with a 47-year political history of accomplishing precisely nothing, except using his son and his position as former vice president to funnel dark money to his family from Chinese and Russian companies. Serving as his VP will be Kamala Harris, a woman who slept her way into power as a 29-year-old woman having an affair with 60-years-old and married Willie Brown. She has a long history of extending the prison sentences of minorities in order to use prisoners for state labor, but thank God we'll finally have people of character back in the halls of power. North of the border, the Canadian Liberal government survived its non-confidence vote, condemning Canadians for the time being to suffer through the rest of Justin Trudeau's time in office. Justin Trudeau was overheard wistfully hoping that the clouds of hairspray surrounding him like an aura would be enough to blind Canadians to the wee charity scandal, his government's endless lies, finance violations, and utopian aspirations for the great communist reset. I'm Patrick Jolliker, and this is the Hemlock Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Hemlock Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, jumping on, and watching or listening, whatever you're doing. My apologies for the wait between episodes. Just newly married man trying to figure out life and work and marriage and all that stuff. So hopefully we'll be consistent, a little more consistent moving forward. But got a fun episode planned today. We're going to talk about COVID. We're going to talk about the elections, just like what the hell is going on in the world right now. It's kind of crazy and fun. And yeah, I think my response to it has been kind of the theme of this podcast, right? Irreverence and joy. Think for yourself and examine things critically. And it's a fun time to be alive. Don't let it get to you too much, whether it's politics or COVID or whatever it is. There's a lot of hope and a lot of humor, and I know there's a lot of tragedy and things that people are scared about, but a lot of that is up to you to not face it with that kind of attitude. So we're gonna have fun today. We're gonna talk about some serious stuff, but we're gonna have a good time doing it. And good to see you back. A couple things before we jump in. We're actually going to talk a few of our topics today. We had some contributors. I'll be posting on Facebook and Instagram here and there, Twitter, Parler, all that kind of stuff. Just looking for people to comment and contribute, right? I don't want this show to just be my voice. So if you see me post if you're not following, first of all, on like Facebook, Twitter, Parler, I think it's called parlay. It's a French word for talk, right? Americans all call it Parler, but anyways. So yeah, Parler, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. Give us a subscribe, follow, all that kind of stuff. That stuff helps a lot, especially in YouTube. I don't know what happened. We got found by like just a bunch of angry people right away on YouTube. So like the comments are just a toxic gong show on YouTube. So yeah, if you feel like having some fun, jump in the comments on YouTube, throw some likes and comments our way. Maybe we can bring some positivity into those comment sections, because they're a nightmare right now. And then some things that would help support us. So if you go to the hemlockpodcast.locals.com, you can become a financial supporter. That's huge. My wife is waiting for those numbers to get bigger because it helps us eat food. and my dog too, who's down there right now. Rogue, you want to come say hi? Not really. Dad, how are you going to feed me? Supporters at the hemlockpodcast.locals.com. That's how. So we'd really appreciate that. If you believe in what we're doing, that actually frees the time. I wouldn't have to work so much in my day job, so I could do this more. So I'd appreciate that. You can also leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes. That helps us out a lot with the charts, helps us get seen a little more. So if you haven't left us a 5-star rating already, some of those angry people jumped in and left me 1-star ratings right away. And I think I know who a few of them are. So if we could balance that out with some voices of reason, that'd be really appreciated. Also, if you use the links to the stuff we're talking about in the podcast down below to buy those, that helps support the podcast at no extra cost to you. Okay, so we're going to start off today talking about COVID, which is everyone's favorite topic. I know we just can't stop. It's all we talk about these days, so we're going to keep that ball rolling. Shout out to my friend Natasha on Instagram for suggesting this. And she kind of brought up how some of the current restrictions may or may not align with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, stuff like that. I'm going to use British Columbia. That's the province I live. That's a state for those of you in the States. We up here in Canada call our states provinces because we want it to be different. But I wanted to use us as a bit of a case study. Bonnie Henry, who is our provincial health officer, provincial health minister, sorry. What the hell is she? I don't know what she is. Anyways, whatever her title is, she's like the big wig in charge of COVID. But she basically came on this yesterday, being Monday, today is Tuesday the 8th, saying that the current restrictions would stay in place past Christmas. And I'll get into what those restrictions are in a sec here, but I want to break down some of the numbers here, right? So there are 5.147 million people in the province of British Columbia, right? Let's call it 5.15, right? 5.1 million people. Now, in her address to the people, first of all, she said hundreds of people are in hospital with COVID, right? That precise number, by the way, is 349 people as of Tuesday, December 8th, right? So that's like the bare minimum to be qualified. That's like the bare minimum to be referred to as hundreds. There's hundreds of people in hospital, 349, right? That's 150 people away from not even qualifying as hundreds, right? So let me qualify this by saying, look, I know people who have lost people to COVID. It's not something I don't treat seriously, right? I mask up where I'm told to outside. I social distance, all that stuff. I'm not disrespectful or an idiot around the COVID restrictions. But I just want to put this stuff in perspective for you, right? Because Bonnie Henry, when she came on, and for the most part, I really respect Bonnie Henry, right? She's done a great job so far keeping the restrictions pretty lax. BC has had a record low number of COVID cases and deaths compared to the rest of the world, right? It's been really good. There's a bit of a spike now. What's interesting is that the current spike in cases almost exactly mirrors the current spike in testing, because testing has increased a lot. So we're just finding more cases, if you ask me. So in BC, basically, I'll just break down the numbers. This is our capacity for our healthcare system in British Columbia. We have 5,610 acute care beds. We have 206 ICU beds across the province, and we have 384 ventilators across the province, right? So let me break down the numbers here. In British Columbia, which, like I said, is a province of 5.1 million people, we have, the number went up in the last half hour here. We have 352 people in the hospital. In a province of 5.1 million people, 352 people in the hospital, 74 are in critical care, right? Since March, we have 543 deaths, and everyone says like one death is too many, and I agree with that, but it's also not something that grounds you. It's not a phrase that grounds you in reality. One person's too many. So, okay, so how many freedoms are we going to give up to prevent just one death? Like, it's an emotional appeal to ask you to sacrifice freedoms. Things like wearing a mask isn't as big a deal as I think some people are making it. But being forced to wear a mask is dehumanizing for people. You see record amounts of depression and suicide and stuff across because we don't talk to people. We don't treat people as human anymore. I've had this personal experience. When you can't see most of someone's face, you can't read their emotions, you can't connect with them. It does a lot to hamper human connection. And you can see that toll reflected in alcohol and drug abuse rates of suicide, all that kind of stuff. So I think that is a serious thing we need to take into consideration. But the greater toll is the restrictions on seeing people, because in a province of 5.1 million people where we have 350 people in the hospital because of COVID, right? We only have 9,000 active cases and the vast majority of people are recovering. Let me share some other stats for you. 69% of the deaths, the 540 deaths we had, 69% of those deaths are above age 80. 85% of the deaths are above age 70, and a full 96% of the deaths are above age 60. So this is the median age. The median age of people dying from COVID is 85. The life expectancy, just the normal life expectancy, is 79 years. I think it's 79 and a half years. That's the average life expectancy. So the median death from COVID is 5 years older than the average life expectancy. And yet, we right now are in a place where the government will literally fine you to go spend Christmas with your parents. Let me say that again, because when I said that back to myself a couple days ago, that blew my mind. The government wants to fine you for spending Christmas with your parents. And somehow we're all okay with that. Like, look, I get this is a serious thing. It's very contagious, blah, 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 blah. But the point is, people have the intelligence to be careful, right? We're all social distancing. We're all wearing masks. Yes, there's a certain percent of the population being dumb about this thing and not being careful. But to remove that level of freedom from people where I can literally, I think the average fine I'm hearing is like $2,300 for hosting some kind of social gathering. I think it's supposed to be $200 a person for gathering violations or whatever it is, right? But if I would go spend Christmas with my wife and my parents and her parents, right? The government's going to fine us for doing that. Sorry. Like, the answer is no. That's not the government's right. Like my friend Natasha was talking about the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The freedom of association and peaceful assembly don't go out the window because there's a provincial state of emergency, right? And listen, I get that they have the legal power to do that under the state of emergency, according to BC, right? They have the legal wherewithal to do that. We don't have to be okay with that. We don't have to follow that. There's such a thing as a civil disobedience. If I were fined for something, I would have to pay the fine, right? Myself, I would probably challenge it because that's insane to me. That's insane that in a province of 5.1 million people, where there are only 350 people currently hospitalized, and the median age of death from this disease is 85 years old, yet I'm not allowed to spend time with my parents on Christmas Day. Give me a break. The answer is no. Sorry. And let me put this in perspective, because I'm not just trying to be a jerk about this, right? My grandpa passed away in February of this year, and his funeral was, I think, 3 or 4 days before the lockdown started. So if he had passed away like a couple weeks later and had a funeral a couple weeks later, I wouldn't have been able to attend the funeral of my own grandfather, pay respect to this man who was one of the best men I ever knew, and who I loved very dearly my entire life. I want to tell you a little story. I'm not doing this. I'm not trying to use emotions to make a point, because that's something I kind of despise. But I want to make a point about life is precious, and you have to balance that out with fear, right? My grandfather was... We all expected my grandfather to live the longest out of my grandparents. He was the most vibrant, the most healthy, the most mentally acute. He was still doing really well. He was at his old folks' home, and he stepped off a curb one day backwards, and he hit his head. And that hitting his head basically brought on dementia of some sorts, where he got, even though he was the most gentle soul I've ever known, he became really aggressive with my grandma and with the nurses, and he stopped eating, and he just wasted away about a month and a half, and he was gone from being the most healthy of my grandparents to hitting his head on the curb, hitting his head, falling off a curb, and that was it. Fast forward to my sister having her first child. We go to visit my grandpa's wife, his widow, right? My grandma, who is now, because he's gone, her dementia is accelerating. And the way she had to meet her grandson was through a glass door of her old folks' home. She couldn't talk to him or hold him. We were on speakerphone on other sides of a glass door, and that's how she got introduced to her grandson. She still has never held him. And this is months after her husband of 40, 50 years passed away. That shouldn't happen in a free society. Citizens have the intelligence to make good decisions on their own. And even if they don't, they should have the freedom to make stupid decisions. That shouldn't happen. You've had something like, since the start of the pandemic, you've had something like 2 million seniors who didn't have COVID-19 pass away without being able to see their families because their old folks' homes are entirely locked down. Can't see them. Although most of these old folks' homes are getting COVID from staff bringing it into the old folks' home. That happened at my grandma's old folks' home. Is staff brought it in. There was a lockdown. She wasn't able to see. She was actually allowed to see my aunt and only my aunt for the longest time. Even that was disallowed because there was one COVID case brought in by staff. But families aren't allowed to see their grandparents, even in a socially distanced scenario in real life, nothing like that. Even though children, like my sister's son, is not a carrier, the rates of transmission from kids is like 0, and that's been proven over and over again. My grandma still has never held her grandson. We as free-thinking, intelligent citizens should be given the choice whether to meet with my grandmother or not. Yes, we want to protect the old folks' home, of course, but there are other options aside from just disallowing things broadly, especially around, I guess, to the holidays, and you look at the mental health toll this is taken on people. Disallowing people to see their families is ridiculous. It's a totalitarian decision, and sorry, the answer is no. The answer is no. So let me make it clear that I'm not just trying to be a jerk about this and trying to kill grandma. I'm not trying to treat this callously, but people, especially the elderly people in old folks' homes, have such a hard time living and not being close to their family already that this is taking a huge toll on them. And yes, we want to be smart and protect them, but these broad sweeping regulations and the complete basically discounting the intelligence of responsible citizens is ridiculous. And I've heard the thing too, like World War II, they fought through so much, you can wear a mask, right? People in World War II gave up so much and endured so much hardship that you can wear the mask. Yeah, what were they doing that for? Freedom, liberty, right? They were doing it so that people at home could live free from a Nazi fascistic regime, right? They were doing it for freedom. We're over here clambering over each other in a virtue signaling race to give up as much freedom as possible and signal our compliance to the world on social media. Sorry, not the same thing. Not the same thing. When the government wants to fine you for spending Christmas with your parents or grandparents, no, sorry. In the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, right, I'll read this right off. Everyone has the following fundamental freedoms: freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication, which you see even that stuff on Twitter and Facebook. There are all those little caveats where if you post something with talking about coronavirus, talking about the election, whatever, they go, this claim is disputed, and they just link to a general article. That's like me being on the phone with my mom saying, yeah, have you heard about some of the cases of fraud during the election? And then someone on from the phone company jumping in and going, actually, that's disputed. Election fraud is very rare, blah, blah, blah. That's ridiculous, right? They're censoring or providing context for that's not the right to provide context. It's a means of communication, right? Yes, they're a private company, but laws state that you're either a publisher or a platform. If you're a platform, you can't editorialize. You can't just provide context and jump into people's phone conversations, essentially, is the analogy, without being held legally responsible for that. If you're editorializing, if you're controlling content, you have to be held legally liable for everything that's on your platform. Do you think they want to be held to that? Do you think they want that accountability? No, they don't. Then they have to stop acting like it. Because you can't have your cake and eat it too. That's not how the laws work, right? It's either you're a platform and you're not responsible for the content on your platform, or you're a publisher, right? And if you want to control people's speech, then you have to be regulated like a publisher, right? So the freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression big tech is throwing a huge wrench into that. Freedom of peaceful assembly, right? We can touch on apparently all these protests and stuff are fine in massive cities where people aren't social distance, a lot of times not wearing masks. But churches are being prevented from gathering, right? They have caps on 50 social distance and stuff. And I get a lot of that, but you can't, again, have your cake and eat it too. Why is a protest allowed when churches aren't being allowed to gather? Peaceful assemblies, that right is being trampled on. Freedom of association, right? Again, I'll say this again. The government wants to fine you for spending Christmas with your family. Say that in a context where you haven't been beaten over the head by a biased media for 8 months. How is that okay in a free society? It's not. It's just not. And I treat this disease seriously. But sorry, province of 5.1 million people and only 350 are in the hospital? You can spend Christmas with my parents. Like, give me a break. Even Bonnie Henry, right? Because you talk about, okay, we only have 206 ICU beds, and there's like 77 in ICU beds right now. She even mentioned, and this is a quote from her back when the pandemic started, right? So in 2009, the spread of the H1N1 pandemic, right, it left there's a ton of young people on ventilators. And I have links to all the articles from BC Local News. I have links to all my sources in the description. But this is a quote from the article quoting Bonnie Henry. "This is something we can do if we need to," she said. In 2009, she said, "We had a lot of young people who needed ventilatory care and it would have overwhelmed our ICU capacity, but hospitals developed plans around the province because it wasn't affecting every ICU at the same time." It was the same situation as now, right? Even their ability to do this, right, under the Emergency Program Act and Public Health Act in BC, they're written pretty vaguely, so they're pretty broad sweeping regulatory powers right now, which is why they can say you can't see your parents on Christmas without being fined. It's not allowed to happen. It doesn't mean we can't speak up about it, right? Sorry, time is precious. Time is precious. Like, people can go anytime. COVID should be proving that to us. So am I going to be separating myself from my family during something where the chances of passing away are even greater than normal? Hell no. I want to spend every second I want to spend as much time as I can with my family. And right now, we're not allowed to do it during Christmas time. Frick off. Like, sorry, I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but that's honestly, like, this is why it requires some kickback from citizens, right? Maybe some civil disobedience, because in my opinion, and maybe legally, sure, it is not the purview of the government to tell me I'm not allowed to see my parents at Christmas time. Citizens should have the liberty to be responsible and make intelligent decisions for themselves, and that's massive overreach, in my opinion. And this is maybe not the case with Bonnie Henry, but I found this is a hilarious story, I think. That just shows a lot of these people making the decisions don't actually believe this whole thing, right? And again, I'm not talking about Bonnie Henry here. Gavin Newsom is the clown governor of California. I don't know if you heard this story, but he was people took pictures of him at a restaurant called the French Laundry, where the average meal is like $400. They had a $15,000 liquor bill. No social distancing, no masks, nothing. Turns out he was actually he was like, oh, I had a really good friend who was having like a 50th birthday or whatever. It turns out to be a bunch of lobbyists. And I'm not saying everyone's hypocritical, right? This guy has a 10 p.m. curfew in California. A bunch of restaurants went out to like make all these outdoor dining spaces. They closed that down entirely. You can't do even outdoor dining anymore. It's only takeout or delivery. They're just screwing over small businesses. 10 p.m. to I think 5 a.m. curfew. Blah, blah, like, it's oppressive in California. The restrictions are even worse than they are here. And yet this guy gets photographed at one of the most expensive restaurants in California, not wearing masks, not social distancing. People are hypocrites. I won't even fault. Do I fault him for that? Yeah, sure, right? The guy's being a jerk, right? And a hypocrite. But it belies how serious they think this actually is. If you believed that COVID was as serious as you're telling everyone it is with the restrictions you're putting in place, as soon as you walk into a restaurant, we see no one's wearing masks and we're all at one table sitting close together. Sorry, I'm scared. I don't want my family to get this. This is a really dangerous disease. I'm out of here, right? That's what you would do if you believed this was real. He doesn't. He doesn't believe it himself. Most of these people do not believe it themselves because do as I say, not as I do, right? That's what this whole philosophy is with a lot of these bureaucrats. And when you look at the numbers, that bears that out. The amount of damage this has done to the economy and to small businesses and to mental health and drug abuse and child abuse and alcohol abuse and all this kind of stuff. Grandparents passing away without getting to see their families first. Sorry, this is massive government overreach on a huge scale that North America hasn't seen. And we need to stop just complying and handing over our freedoms in a race to be the model citizen. Give me a break. If you're a foodie, good food is hands down the best food subscription box my wife and I have tried, and we've tried, I'm pretty sure, all of them that are available where we live. And it's hands down restaurant quality, like fine dining, make it yourself at home with all the ingredients you need. It's phenomenal. And if you use the link below, you'll get a $40 discount on your first box. Definitely worth trying. It's priced great. It tastes great. Phenomenal. So enjoy some good food. moving from that to elections, which again, it's just been a stream of like rough elections. In BC here, the NDP got in, which is like a socialist leaning, they're like socialist light province, which means we still have a state-run car insurance monopoly called ICBC, which everyone's fed up with, and they're going to keep it intact. Canada, like I said in the intro, Trudeau, his government, because the federal NDP sided with him, passed the non-confidence vote. Survived the non-confidence vote, so we're stuck with him until his term ends. This whole Biden and Trump thing in the States. So what struck me as interesting about that was that there was this whole rush where all the news outlets announced Biden as the winner way before it was actually certified. It's been certified now in a lot of provinces, even though there's actually ongoing litigation. Obviously, Trump is suing a whole bunch of different states for election fraud, which might be true, might not be true, right? I'm honestly still undecided. I've seen evidence for it in small batches. I've seen a lot of evidence in kind of small cases. Nothing on the scale that would lead me to believe there was massive widespread election fraud to turn over the results of the election. But that's still up in the air, right? But this is like this is weeks ago that the media declared Biden as president. This is before province or states had even certified their election results. Which again just shows the corruption of the media. They're just a joke. Legacy media is no longer a source of truth. And if you're still listening to places like in the States, CNN, MSNBC is at least honest because they know they're left. Even Fox used to be like the right wing conservative, blah blah blah. It's like even they're kind of losing it. But like all the main news, Guardian, the New York Times, a joke. Yeah, like a lot of them are just a joke. CTV, CBC up here are a joke again. And there's just example after example after example of them just lying through their teeth, and verifiably, right? They're just not good at. They're not good actors anymore. The media used to be speaking truth to power, and it's speaking lies for power, basically, is what legacy media has become, which is why I started this podcast, which is why I listen to the sources that I do. I'm not just talking about conservative sources, right? I'm talking about find sources that you find honest on both sides, which is what I've tried to do, and that's why I come down in the middle a lot. Legacy media is just a joke, right? They just lie constantly, whether it's about, we had 3 or 4 years of lies about the whole Russian collusion thing that everyone forgot about Russian collusion for Trump because that just went away. But then Hunter Biden's son, there's actually like verifiable evidence with the whole Hunter Biden laptop story that they're like, he's making deals with Chinese and Russian companies being paid huge amounts by oil companies. And where is that money going, right? Somehow Joe Biden was making like $300,000 a year as vice president, but he's made $16 million since he was the vice president. Give me a break. What, book sales? Okay, not a chance. And that actually brings up a good point. Is that I keep hearing too, even from people I like love and respect, like smart, intelligent people, right? Keep saying that like, oh, I made the joke in the intro that Biden's just a man of character, and it's so good to have decency and back in the White House. And it's like, what are you talking about? This dude, first of all, has lied his entire political career. There's lies about him, the way he graduated from college, how well he did in college, what degrees he had. He lies about all that. The crime bill, which was notorious for like jailing people in the Black community for like minor drug offenses, thanks to Joe Biden. Kamala Harris, again, this whole character argument, she was like given these two like high positions by Willie Brown, who is this 60-year-old married guy that she slept with, like she slept her way into power, but they just seem like decent, good people. It's like, no, it's because the entire media conglomerate is covering for them and you're falling for it, right? There's nothing good, I'm not saying Trump's a better option as far as character goes. He's done some gross stuff. I'm not a fan of that, right? His policies have been a lot better than I thought they would be in 2016. Like I mentioned it in the intro again, right? Record unemployment for minorities, peace in the Middle East. There's like record-breaking peace deals in the Middle East that like no one. Obama's like those will never happen, right? It happened under Trump. Lowest Black unemployment in 60 years, female unemployment, like unemployment generally, right? Best economy the U.S. has ever seen before the coronavirus, and then one of the most record-breaking recoveries that the U.S. has ever seen from a downfall, right? From a recession. So it's like there's been a lot of good stuff that you never hear about. But Biden and Kamala are decent, good people that have done a lot. Kamala Harris is running around jailing minorities for, she was denying evidence to be shown at trials, so that prison sentences could be extended because they have state labor, like prison labor in California. And so, like, not good people, corrupt, disgusting. I could go on and on with examples like this, right? It's ridiculous. Even Biden, there's like videos of this guy like touching little girls' chests. You can look it up. Just look up like Biden touching girls on YouTube, and it's gross. The dude's like a freak. He's a total creep, right? And I'm not saying Trump isn't, right? Again, but that I see like good, even like Christian people going like Biden's a good guy. Like, no, he's not. No, he's not. He's been living on the public dime for 47 years, lying through his teeth the whole time and being a creep, like funneling money to his family. Give me a break. Really quick note on the debates, because this is a while ago now, but I just thought this was kind of funny. Because I've always been pretty like super anti-politician, but somehow like the media, like an angry toddler vying for attention, has usurped my hatred for politicians. So like what happens with Trump, right? Savannah Guthrie was the one basically interviewing him, right? For the town, basically they had like separate town halls, right? So Savannah Guthrie was with Trump, and then Lester Holt was with Biden. In Trump's, Savannah keeps like cutting him off when he's talking to voters. So she's like fact checking him in real life, even though most of her fact checking is bogus, and using like a ton of like these really incredibly specific like anecdotal pieces of evidence or like isolated case studies. In Trump's especially too is like they had basically someone framed. There was this black lady in the background who's like nodding at everything Trump says, like clearly a Trump supporter, right? And they as the town hall goes on, they eventually like frame her out to like include the white lady in this background who's like looking really stoic and stern and blah. But they're like, because this black lady's in the background, like, yeah, Trump, yeah, like nodding her head the whole time. They frame up the black lady as the town hall goes on to include this like white lady who looks pissed off the whole time, right? Which is, again, listen to black voices. Hypocrites. You're lying, right? You're lying. That was a black voice nodding in support of Trump, and you framed her out of the shot because that's not good for your narrative, right? And then in Biden's just basically getting handed softball questions the entire time, right? I think he said at one point, he said like 210 million people have died from COVID. 210 million people is 2/3 of the population of the U.S., which is clearly not true. And he misspoke again, but he has dementia pretty much, so he's always misspeaking and no one cares. No one talks about it. Basically, all the questions Trump gets asked are framed to make him look bad, whereas Biden, even the questions asked of Biden are framed to make Trump look bad as well, right? He's constantly, like, Trump's constantly cut off, fact checked. Biden never is. He's allowed to talk. Even the way that's framed, it's like the whole Trump town hall was like just like static shot, really boring, really like straightforward. And whereas Biden, they're doing like these sweeping camera angles and like he gets up and addresses the crowd and it's all dramatic and just like getting these like wide angle shots, and it's just like the production in these two town halls, like the production difference is insane, right? They're like framing out supporters in one and making it really boring and not fun to watch, and then the other one, they're like throwing softball questions at him the whole time, giving these like wide, epic, sweeping camera angles. Like, anyways, it was just funny. The bias to me was just insane, right? I'm not a Trump apologist in a lot of ways. I'll defend his policies a lot of time because I think they're great. Happy to debate people on that, right? Because most people just don't know the good things, right? They just simply don't know the good things, which is why I want to talk about them. But there was a moment where Lester Holt actually basically like called Biden out on like name calling. To his credit, it was like the only time Lester Holt spoke up, right? Like I said, Savannah Guthrie was like constantly fact checking Trump with or without basis. Lester Holt was silent the entire time, just let Biden talk, right? And again, not going to ask you to trust me. If you're interested in these, go watch them yourselves, right? If I was lying to you, I wouldn't tell you to go watch them for yourselves. Just ask you to trust me blindly. But I find that's always the conservative position, is do your own research and like look it up and verify it. Whereas a lot of times leftist media just wants you to trust them, right? They assume you're stupid, and will listen to them, and it's time to wake up. The one thing I did want to address is I've heard this over and over and over again, and this is why I say like this is why Biden's just a liar, period, right? And you can accuse Trump of that too, sure, but don't delude yourself about Biden not being one as well. He kept using the fine people on both sides lie, like right up to the town halls, like right up to the election. he keeps bringing up this, that Trump said there were fine people, very fine people on both sides. What he's referring to is Charlottesville, where there was basically there was a protest about statues, Confederate statues being ripped down, and so you had a bunch of there were actual white supremacists and actual neo-Nazis at that protest, right? And then there were some people that were just upset about an historic statue being ripped down in their city, right? Because some people think that statues should be left up so that whether they're good or bad, so that you can have that conversation and go, hey, that guy wasn't a good guy. They loved him back then, but he was a piece of crap. You know what I mean? Keep the statue up to have that story told, right? So there were people just there protesting that the statue shouldn't be ripped down. And then there was the other side was a lot of Antifa people, which are a violent terrorist group. They're the ones responsible for burning cities like Portland and Seattle, and there's tons in LA and Chicago and stuff, just Kenosha, just literally burning stores and stuff to the ground. They're a radical leftist group. And then there were some people that were protesting against the fact that there were white supremacists and neo-Nazis out there, right? Of course. So what Trump was referring to is he said there were very fine people on both sides. There's people protesting white supremacy, and there were people protesting statues getting ripped down. Those are good causes, right? White supremacy is gross. You should protest that. Statues being ripped down, you can make a good case for protesting that, right? He literally said, Trump said this in the next sentence if you watch the whole clip, and I'm amazed this lie has been told for 3 or 4 years by the media, and Biden right up till the election night was telling this lie. Don't tell me he's ignorant or didn't know that Trump clarified, because you're running for president of the United States. The guy's got good sources. That's not an excuse when you're running for a position like that. Trump in the very next sentence goes, there's very fine people on both sides, and I'm specifically not talking about the white supremacists, the neo-Nazis. I condemn them totally, right? And that's pretty much an exact quote. Again, you can look it up. If you watch the whole clip, that's literally what he says. He's specifically not talking about the white supremacists or the neo-Nazis, and he condemns them totally. He condemns white supremacy and neo-Nazism all the time, and yet the media and Biden and Kamala Harris were accusing him of tacitly endorsing white supremacy. They're just lying. They're just lying to you because they think you're stupid. They think you won't do the research, and you'll just trust them blindly, which unfortunately a lot of people do, right? Just not true. To kind of sum up today's episode, right? Think for yourself, for crying out loud. Don't accept what you hear from politicians or bureaucrats or journalists because they barely deserve the title these days. Think for yourself. Do your own research. It's the reason I have a podcast like this is because most people don't care about politics, right? That's fine. I hope I can make this entertaining and fun and digestible enough to reach people with an opinion that is not as common, because most of the stuff I talked about today, people I know don't know, right? Again, not their fault. I don't expect everyone to be as interested in this stuff as I am. But when it starts to go to places where freedoms are being trampled on, right? You can't go spend Christmas with your parents without getting a fine from the government over a disease where the median age of death is 85 years old, right? You have a 99.9% of not dying from COVID. Yes, you should be careful, right? Yes, you shouldn't be a jerk because it's a contagious disease, and you should be careful. You should put it in places. You should be cautious. But death is a reality. Death has always been a reality. And when you look at how much we are being asked to sacrifice, our small businesses, our goals and dreams, our finances, the taxes are going to increase crazily with the amount of stimulus packages that have been used to recover from the lockdowns that probably didn't need to be there. When it starts to affect freedom and liberty, and our ability to be free-thinking individuals in a free society, you should be more well-informed. You really should be. And this is a time where we need to start knowing the facts ourselves, and we need to start speaking up about them, because just going along with a mainstream narrative that is constantly false and constantly disingenuous, and with politicians who are very willing to take advantage of that fact. I'm not saying all of them are. I think Bonnie Henry has made a lot of decisions in good faith. But I think this one goes too far. I really do, because there are other things to consider past just getting sick from COVID, spending time with family, aging family, the toll it's taken on mental health. You can't just take people's freedoms and expect them to go quietly. And too many of us are. And I think it's really scary how quickly we're willing to give up our freedom. Look, things like elections, when they don't go your way, can be scary. Things like COVID, obviously, can be scary. But even in the case of COVID, right, because you have epidemiologists still deciding and disagreeing about this kind of thing. I'm more troubled by how willing our populace is to hand over our freedoms to bureaucrats, sometimes blatantly ignoring epidemiologists, or even listening to epidemiologists who have been observably political, right? Unfortunately, we have disingenuous politicians and disingenuous journalists, disingenuous academics, that truth is harder and harder to find these days. And we should be less and less willing to accept the truth as we're told at face value. Please listen to things like alternative media. If you're just listening to legacy media, stop. They are not good faith actors anymore. Tune into podcasts like this, tune into alternative media, people actually doing good journalistic work. You can tell when someone's actually got a basis in reality, because their stuff holds up under examination. And so much of legacy media and so much of what politicians are saying these days doesn't hold up under any scrutiny. And yet they're using those things to trample on more and more of our freedoms slowly. It's like a frog. It's like that old story of the frog in water, right? If you throw a frog in boiling water, he jumps out right away, right? Because it burns him. But if you put a frog in cold water and you slowly boil him, he'll stay in there until he boils to death. And that's, I think, what's happening is certain politicians and the media are using this whole COVID excuse, this whole electoral nonsense all over the place, to see how far they can go, to see how much they can get away with. It's power. It's control. So many of them are power hungry and control hungry. They're just seeing what they can get away with. And I think we should be very careful of it if we want to maintain a free society. Not trying to be paranoid or a conspiracy theorist, but you read history and you learn how fragile democracies like ours are. And we should be very mindful of that. Liberty is not the default. Freedom is not the default for society. We have been violent and controlling our entire history. And what we have, we should recognize as very special, and we should treat it that way. Freedom is rare. Liberty is rare. And those are gifts that many of us are much too entitled about. So, wanted to provide a fresh perspective today. Again, continue to live with irreverence and joy. Have some fun. I know things are scary and crazy right now, but spend time with your family. Hold them close. Love them dearly. Laugh with them. Those are the things that matter, and we should cling to them very tightly, and we should fight for our liberty and fight for our families. And I hope you all have an excellent week, and we'll see you again soon. Take care. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to this week's Hemlock podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share it with your friends and family. Tell them to subscribe, because if you loved it, then they're going to love it too, obviously. Also, head on over to iTunes to leave us a 5-star rating and review. That helps us a lot with the charts. And if you're not going to leave us 5 stars, then forget about it. Don't worry about it and enjoy the rest of your day. Lastly, head on over to the hemlockpodcast.locals.com to become a supporter and receive access to exclusive content and ad-free versions of the Hemlock podcast. Love you so much for listening. Let's continue to ride out this increasingly insane world with irreverence and joy. This is your host, Patrick Jolliker, and much love, y'all. Peace.